Hey guys, I am Amy Cornell with AC Knows, and I just wanted some time to get a little deeper on some of the forms that we have seen come out just in the last couple of months that are helping us navigate the new commission world that happened post settlement. So that settlement went into effect nationwide August 17th of 2024 for all Realtor members, and so we're trying to make sure that we've got everything documented correctly. And both Realtor members and homeowners are trying to make sure that the documents meet what they want them to. So whether you're a Realtor member or you're a homeowner, this is something that you might want to really watch so that way you can make sure your forms are doing what you intend them to do. All right, so let's start with this one. This is the Texas Realtors Residential Real Estate Listing Agreement. I am a Texas Realtor, so I'm authorized to use these forms. Hopefully, whoever you're working with, if you're in the state of Texas, is a Texas Realtor as well. But if not, then your forms may look different than this because that's what these are for. So hopefully that's clear. All right, so this one is our form number TXR 1101, and you can find that down in the bottom left corner, and it also has the date that it went into effect. So this one is relatively brand new. All right, so then what we wanted to talk about really is this paragraph 5, broker compensation. This is the main thing that changed in these forms, and so we want to make sure that everybody is comfortable with them and that they're signing something that meets what they were planning on doing. Paragraph 5 now has two main parts. So 5A is broker's fee with compensation for other broker. 5B is broker's fee without compensation for other broker. We're going to camp on 5A for a minute, really make sure that we've got all of that figured out, and then we'll move on to 5B. 5A is the more traditional way that we've seen of doing real estate, where the seller says from the very onset of listing their home that, hey, I am willing to pay a compensation amount to the listing brokerage, and I want the listing brokerage to pay part of that to the listing agent and part of it to the buyer's agent, listing agent being seller's agent. Obviously, both of the brokerages also take some parts of that, and there's some other things that go into that, but that's basically what this paragraph A is going to say. It's that traditional way of doing real estate where all of the seller's money goes to the listing brokerage, and then the listing brokerage divides it up. Okay, so that's what we're seeing in paragraph 5A. Wanted to point out a couple of different sections. So 5A2 that's where it is saying, hey, this is how much we're going to pay to the buyer's agent. It says if the other broker, which other broker being buyer's agent, procures a buyer that purchases the property, seller authorizes broker to pay, and broker will pay the other broker the following fees from the amount specified in paragraph 5A, and then it specifically clarifies what that amount would be. It also says in 5A3, seller authorizes broker to publicly disclose compensation for other broker as specified in 5A2. That is okay to publicly disclose, but not on MLS per our settlement agreement. So you won't see that broadcast on a syndicated website like an MLS or some sort of other consumer site where all of the things are, but it does allow us to advertise that. So you may see a sign writer, you may see forms in the home that say, hey, this is what's happening. So just know that's normal too. And then 5A4 is broker will retain, and when I say broker, that means listing broker, listing agent, will retain amounts specified in 5A1 as broker's fee if there is no other broker that procures the buyer, including but not limited to transactions where a broker represents both seller and buyer as intermediary or buyer is unrepresented. Amounts specified in 5A2A will be applied toward any fees a buyer has agreed to pay a broker as specified in a separate written representation agreement. All right, let's break that out into two parts. The first part is saying that, hey, if somebody walks in to an open house and doesn't have representation and doesn't choose to have representation, then your agent, the listing agent, could get the entire amount that's in paragraph 5A1A. That's fine. That's the way it has always been, but it's just clarifying that to make sure that both the realtor and the consumer member know that's what will happen in that situation. And then in that second sentence, it's just clarifying that whatever the buyer's agent is taking, or the other broker in this nomenclature is taking, that has to be set up in a separate written representation agreement. Part of the settlement was that every buyer that tours the home that is represented would need to have a written buyer representation agreement in place prior to touring the home. And so that should not be a big deal at all for the other brokerage to have. It's not something that the listing broker has access to, but it's something that the buyer's agent knows they can't take more than what they negotiated in the buyer rep from the very beginning. We'll get into that in just a minute, but that's a key part of this as well. Okay, so 5A, we're good with, right? Traditional way of doing it. Gross amount, so total amount to go to listing broker and buyer's agent would be in 5A 1A, and then whatever amount is being paid out to the other agent is going to be in 5A 2A. So if you were somebody who wanted to charge a 10% commission, let's say, and split it between the agents, then 5A 1A would say 10%, and then 5A 2A would say 5%. Okay, so just make sure that 5A 1A has the gross amount in there. All right, so now let's go down to section B, 5B, broker's fee without compensation for other broker. And that is the relatively new way. It has been a way that we have been able to manipulate our forms in the past, but it just wasn't done very often. Now it's being done more. And so this is a way where it is just saying, hey, I'm the listing agent and that's all that I am. I am not in any way associated with the broker for the buyer. And so the listing brokerage is taking in X amount, whatever is in 5B1A, but it is not a gross amount where I'm splitting up the amounts. It is just my money, just my compensation. If that makes sense. Okay, so that's fine too, but just different on both of those. Then it has down here at the very bottom where it says note authorization to disclose seller paying buyer's expenses. Seller either does or does not authorize broker to disclose to other brokers and prospective buyers that seller will consider contributing an amount towards buyer expenses, such as buyer's broker's fees and other expenses payable by a buyer under the sales contract. All right, so that would be, let's say that a seller wanted to use 5B1A and put the amount that they are willing to pay for their property to be marketed well and represented well. And that's the amount that they're willing to pay for their listing agent. But they don't want to just pay for a buyer's agent before we even get something at contract. They want to make sure that the contract amount is sufficient for them before they agree to make a payment on there. And it's not, obviously, I don't want to misconstrue that. None of the actual payments would be made until the property closes. It's just they don't want to even say, hey, I am for sure going to give the buyer's agent this much. They want to really make sure that the whole deal is settled before they agree to pay anything, if anything. And so that would be down here in that note section. They would check either does or does not authorize to say. So it may be that the seller says, yeah, I'm willing to pay a 5% commission to a buyer's agent, but I want to pay that directly rather than have it go into the listing agent and then go to the buyer's agent. I want it to just go straight from me to the buyer's agent. That is totally fine too. And so in that circumstance, you would check seller does authorize there. Or if they just wanted to consider offers with that, they would check seller does. Really, you would only check seller does not in a situation where the seller has said absolutely positively do not bring me an offer where it has any sort of compensation payable from me to the buyer's agent at all. So totally fine, just ways that you can do it on here. All right, so now let's talk about what forms you would use to memorialize this form. So this form is a form between the seller and the listing brokerage. This is a private form that does not go to the buyer's agent, title company, really anybody. It stays within the seller and the listing brokerage. But because there are a lot of moving parts on this, we need to memorialize how much money is in this, so that way all of the settlement agreements and those kind of things can get drawn correctly. So let's talk about if you were using 5A. If you were using 5A and the seller had authorized an amount to say, hey, yes, I'm going to say that you as the listing broker can pay another broker part of it, then you're going to use this compensation agreement between brokers, which is our form 2402. This is a simple one-page form that just memorializes and says, hey, I'm the listing broker. I am going to pay you as the buyer's agent, buyer's broker, cooperating broker, other broker. We're seeing lots of nomenclature on that, but that amount would get paid by virtue of my listing agreement. You can't see my listing agreement, but I can tell you right now, I am willing to stand up and say, yes, that's going to get paid. We're good on that if it is paragraph 5A. If it is paragraph 5B, but the seller has said, hey, yeah, bring me an offer. I want to see those kind of things. Then we would do this does. But they might also say, hey, I want to offer that 5% compensation to a buyer's agent. And so then you would execute this one, compensation agreement between broker and owner. And that would say, hey, I, as the seller, want to pay a buyer's agent potentially however 5%, however much they want to. They can say that on here and give this to all people who are coming to see that home so that they know, hey, there's an amount that is payable from the seller to whoever is representing the buyer of my home. And you can clarify that in here. It would need to say that, hey, the broker would be representing the prospect only. And then they could sign this and clarify that, hey, this would be the amount that we would pay. And this is our TXR 2401. All right, so that is something that we have not ever used this form for before. This is a form that was traditionally used for sale by owner, where it would be where the buyer's agent would go to an owner that was unrepresented. But now we are seeing it where this is a great form to be used by a represented seller too, that just doesn't want the money to go through the listing brokerage. They want to go directly from that. Totally fine. All right, so that would be 5B. What if we are in 5B with kind of this note, and the seller is saying, hey, I don't want to pay 5%, but I'll pay $10,000. I'm willing to give a credit because I know the buyer is going to have to pay that on their own. So I'm willing to tell them like, hey, I've got my house listed at 500,000, let's say, but $10,000 is like coming right off the top, and I'm going to give it to you to help with whatever fees you want to pay. Then you would use this TXR 1412, and it says it right here. That's the correct form. This is the one that comes up for that. It's seller's authorization to disclose and advertise certain information. And in here, again, TXR 1412. And so in here you would say $10,000. Seller authorizes broker to disclose to other brokers and prospective buyers that seller will consider contributing an amount up to $10,000 towards buyer expenses. Buyer may use these funds to pay for buyer's broker's fees or other expenses payable by buyer under a sales contract. Then it has in bold, seller is not obligated to pay this amount or any other amount unless seller agrees to such payment in the sales contract. So this amount, whatever is negotiated between the parties, would still have to be in the contract, which in our 1 to 4 family contracts, that's going to be in paragraph 12A 1B. But you're going to, so this is just like an advertisement. So this is in the same way that we're saying, hey, the house is worth 500,000. I would love to see offers for 500,000. In the same way for this, you're saying, hey, I would love to sell my house for 500,000. I'm willing to give up to 10 if you meet my other terms. It does not make a seller have to meet all those other terms. Again, I know it's been a minute since we've been in multiple offers as a matter of custom. It used to be where you put your house up for 500,000, but it would sell for 550, right? So again, that the listing price is a starting place. This is a starting place too. This is something that can be negotiated, but it does give the seller permission to really market that home and make sure that all parties know, hey, this is what the intention was. Okay. So the one other form that we have not talked about in here, but that is really important and are potentially the most important form that we have now is our 2406, and it's called our addendum regarding broker fees. This would be used, in my opinion, when 5B is done, and then rather than doing it this way where the seller just wants to offer a blanket amount, or rather than doing it this way where they want to just offer a blanket percentage, if it is truly being negotiated, the compensation for the buyer's agent is being negotiated as a deal term, then you would want to have this form allows in paragraph D2B, and it says, hey, the seller and the buyer are signing this form, and they're saying, hey, I want the seller to pay the buyer's agent X dollars. And so that's what this is going to be. This section, paragraph D2B, is what creates a new obligation for the seller to pay that amount. They wouldn't want to do that if we have 5A, because they would have already clarified, hey, I'm going to pay this gross amount in 5A 1A. unless maybe the gross amount wasn't enough, then they could adjust it in addendum. But really, this 5D2B is not for use in that situation. It is also not for use in the situation where the seller has already clarified on a compensation agreement between broker and owner that they are going to pay that amount. This form, the 2401, would have been used, 2401, sorry, let me double check myself, would have been used before an offer is made. So usually on this, we list the house and then they're going to know from the very beginning, hey, the seller's authorizing a credit of $10,000. The seller's authorizing me as the brokerage to pay a commission of 5%. The seller is authorizing and he's going to pay directly to you as the buyer's representative 5%. Whatever that is, all of that's being done prior to an offer being written. But this one, the addendum regarding broker's fees, is the one, whoops, all right, there you go. This one is being done at time of contract. So this is where this is addendum that will be attached to the contract signed by both the buyer and seller. None of these other forms have been signed by both the buyer and the seller. This one had been signed by the seller and the buyer's agent. This one would be signed between the listing agent and the buyer's agent. This one would be signed by the seller as part of the listing agreement, and the listing agreement was signed between the listing agent and the seller. So this form is really a really cool new form that we likely will see go away shortly. And when I say that, it's not in a bad way. It's that right now this is a Texas Realtors only form because we have not seen our real estate commission come up with a form that is a little more elegant and where it's available for all realtor members and agent members and for all consumers in the state of Texas. But right now, this is a great form and just such a benefit that we have seen come out post settlement to really make sure that the parties are clear on what's happening. Now, to that end, this form does allow for clarity if you are using a 24 or a 20, which would be those compensation agreements, this one or this one. It says in D1, hey, if you have a 2402, you can clarify it here. But this does not create the actual agreement. This is just for informational purposes. Same as D2A. If there was a 2401, you could add that in there and clarify it, but this amount is just for informational purposes only. In both of those situations, this form or this form would control. This one would just be like for informational purposes, which we have seen before on page 10 of our 1-to-4 family contract, always, where it has had an amount in there as a, hey, this is what compensation will have in there, but it really didn't mean anything because it was just for informational purposes only. Okay, but this form, D2B, does say, hey, this is totally new, but the buyer is making an offer usually and saying, hey, I want this amount paid towards my buyer rep because I have a buyer rep for that amount. Now, let's talk a little bit about buyer reps. We've got two buyer reps now in the state of Texas. We have our 1501, which is this one, the residential buyer tenant representation agreement long form. And then we have our new 1507 residential buyer tenant representation agreement short form. Either one of these will work. They're both fine to take a client all the way through closing, but you would want to make sure that whatever commission amount is being negotiated and accepted by the other broker, buyer's agent, cooperating broker, whatever we're calling that person. I wish it was the same on all the forms, but if that party cannot take an amount that is in excess of whatever is negotiated under their residential buyer tenant agreement. This form would have been signed before they toured the home too, right? We have these listing forms that were all done prior to ever having somebody make an offer on the house. We have these two forms that are done prior to somebody ever walking into the house. And then we have this one that tries to bring them all together and clarify, hey, this is what it is. Now, the buyer's agent does not have the benefit of seeing the listing agreement. The listing agent does not have the benefit of seeing the buyer's agreement. So this form is really this clarifying form that tries to help all the parties make sure they're all on the same page and that we're doing it well. For me, if I'm using the 2402 or 2401, I don't know that I would use this form, but it may become part of just regular practice where we see this on every deal going forward, unless the buyer is paying their fees on their own, which that's the other world that we didn't talk about today, but that is still totally fine as it always has been. Okay, Keep in mind that this addendum, in order for it to work, this is not a standalone form. This needs to be attached to a contract. So if we were attaching it to our Texas 1 to 4 family residential contract, you would want to make sure that back on paragraph 22, that under other, you are checking that box and writing in addendum for, gosh, what are we calling that one again? As I'm There's our new forms, right? Again, addendum regarding broker's fees. So you would want to make sure that you have that there. Ah, there we go. And so that we make sure that everybody is on the same page and that is actually attached to this form. Anyway, I hope that all helps. There is so much that's going on with all of these changes that we want to make sure that people have a good understanding of what is happening so that you can make sure that your forms are saying exactly what they want to. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message. I'm happy to jump in and help give you as much guidance as I can. Again, I am not your broker and not your attorney, but I am here to help. Talk soon.